The Heart Sutra brings us to one of its most startling statements. There is no wisdom, no attainment, and no non-attainment. For someone encountering these words for the first time, they can sound almost impossible to understand. How can the Heart Sutra praise the perfection of wisdom and then suddenly say there is no wisdom? How can Buddhism speak about awakening, liberation, and enlightenment and then say there is nothing to attain? If there is nothing to attain, why practice meditation? Why study the Dharma? Why follow the path of the Bodhisattva? These questions are not mistakes. They are exactly the questions this part of the Heart Sutra invites us to investigate. To understand this teaching, we first need to understand what the Heart Sutra means when it uses the word no. The sutra is not simply saying that wisdom does not exist, or that enlightenment is imaginary, or that Buddhist practice has no value. It is pointing to something much more subtle. It is saying that wisdom cannot be grasped as a fixed possession, and awakening cannot be grasped as an object that a separate self acquires. The deeper we enter the teaching of emptiness, the more carefully we must examine the one who wants to possess wisdom and the thing that is supposedly being possessed. Imagine someone standing beside a vast ocean with a small glass in their hand. They fill the glass with seawater and say, "Now I possess the ocean." There is certainly ocean water in the glass. The glass is not empty of water, but the ocean cannot be reduced to what is contained in that glass. The mistake is not having the water. The mistake is believing that the entire ocean has become a possession. In a similar way, a person may study hundreds of Buddhist teachings, memorize sutras, understand difficult philosophical concepts, and have profound meditation experiences. Yet if the mind says, "I have attained wisdom, I am now a wise person," something very subtle has happened. Wisdom has been turned into an object of possession, and a new identity has been created around it. This is one of the great paradoxes of spiritual practice. At the beginning, we need teachings, we need concepts, we need meditation instructions, we need discipline, we need teachers, we need to distinguish wholesome actions from harmful actions and clarity from confusion. We need to cultivate compassion, mindfulness, patience, generosity, and wisdom. But as practice deepens, there comes a point where even these things must not become objects of attachment. The teachings are meant to free the mind from grasping, not provide the mind with more things to grasp. Consider a person learning to play a musical instrument. At first, they carefully follow every instruction. They learn where to place their fingers, when to breathe, how to hold the instrument, and how to read the notes. Without these instructions, they cannot play properly. But after years of practice, the musician no longer needs to consciously think about every movement. The knowledge has become intimate. The music flows naturally. If the musician stopped in the middle of a performance to think about every individual finger movement, the music might become stiff and unnatural. The instructions were necessary, but they were never the destination. Buddhist teachings can function in the same way. They guide us until wisdom becomes something directly lived, rather than something intellectually collected. The purpose of understanding emptiness is not to give us a sophisticated philosophical theory. It is to loosen our attachment to every fixed theory, including our theories about emptiness itself. This is why the Heart Sutra can say there is no wisdom. It does not mean that wisdom is useless. It means that ultimate wisdom cannot be captured as a fixed thing called my wisdom. There is no permanent substance called wisdom sitting inside someone, waiting to be owned. Wisdom arises dependently. It develops through causes and conditions. It depends on hearing the teachings, reflecting upon them, practicing them, observing experience, letting go of confusion, and seeing reality more clearly. Think of a window being cleaned after years of dust have accumulated on its surface. As the dust is removed, the world outside becomes increasingly visible. We might say that the cleaning has produced clearer vision. But the cleaner does not manufacture the landscape. The mountains were already there, the sky was already there, the sunlight was already there. What changed was the obstruction. In this sense, Buddhist wisdom is not necessarily about acquiring something completely new. It is also about removing what prevents us from seeing clearly. Ignorance, grasping, fixed views, self-centered interpretation, and habitual reactions obscure our perception. Practice gradually exposes these obscurations, The clearer seeing that emerges is called wisdom. But even here, the mind can create another trap. It can say, I am becoming enlightened. It can compare itself with other practitioners. It can become proud of meditation experiences. It can secretly desire recognition. It can even become attached to being unattached. This is why the Heart Sutra continues, cutting through every attempt to create a spiritual identity. Imagine a gardener who carefully removes weeds from a field. After months of work, the field becomes beautiful. One morning, the gardener looks across the field and thinks, I have created purity. But the field did not become beautiful because the gardener created some permanent substance called purity. The gardener removed what was interfering with the natural growth of the plants. Even the gardener's actions depended upon soil, rain, sunlight, seeds, seasons, and countless other conditions. Spiritual practice is similar. We often imagine enlightenment as something we will eventually possess. We imagine that one day there will be a moment when we can say, now I have arrived, now I have become awakened. But the Heart Sutra challenges the structure of that thought. Who is this I that is going to possess awakening? And what is this awakening that can be separated from the conditions through which it arises? This question becomes especially important in Mahayana Buddhism. The Bodhisattva does not practice merely to construct a more impressive spiritual self. The Bodhisattva practices in order to see through the illusion of a separate, permanent self and to respond to suffering with wisdom and compassion. If the Bodhisattva becomes attached to the thought, I am saving sentient beings, the practice has already become mixed with self-grasping. There is a beautiful paradox here. The Bodhisattva acts wholeheartedly, but does not cling to the idea of being the one who acts. The Bodhisattva develops wisdom, but does not turn wisdom into an identity. The Bodhisattva helps others, but does not build a spiritual ego around being helpful. The Bodhisattva seeks awakening, while ultimately understanding that awakening cannot be possessed. Imagine a lamp illuminating a room. The lamp does not say, I am personally responsible for creating light in this entire room. It simply shines according to its nature and conditions. The light allows objects to be seen, but the lamp does not need to claim ownership of what becomes visible. In a similar way, wisdom illuminates experience. It reveals impermanence, dependent origination, emptiness, and the absence of a fixed self. But wisdom does not need to create another identity called the enlightened person. This brings us to the phrase, nothing to attain. This is perhaps even more difficult to understand. If there is nothing to attain, does that mean enlightenment does not exist? No. The statement is pointing beyond the ordinary model of achievement. In ordinary life, attainment means moving from one condition to another. A student does not know mathematics and then learns it. A person does not have a degree and then receives one. Someone does not have a particular skill and then develops it. In these situations, attainment makes sense because there is an identifiable object or status that can be acquired. But enlightenment is not like receiving a certificate. You cannot put awakening on a shelf. You cannot carry it in your pocket. You cannot point to it and say, this belongs to me. The moment awakening becomes another possession of the ego, the very grasping that Buddhism asks us to release has returned. Think of trying to catch your own shadow. You can run toward it, but it keeps moving with you. You can reach for it, but there is nothing solid to grasp. Yet the shadow is not non-existent. It appears under particular conditions. The problem is the attempt to turn it into a thing that can be possessed. In the same way, we can practice diligently, but we cannot grasp enlightenment as an object. Awakening is not something that a separate self collects. It is a transformation in how reality is understood and experienced when grasping and ignorance are seen through. This is why the Buddhist path contains an apparent contradiction. We practice as though awakening matters deeply, while learning that there is no permanent person who can possess awakening. We cultivate wisdom while letting go of the idea of my wisdom. We cultivate compassion while letting go of the identity of I am compassionate. We walk the path while gradually understanding that the path itself is empty of independent existence. Consider a person walking toward the horizon. The horizon appears to be a destination, but no matter how far the person walks, the horizon remains ahead. Does that mean walking is pointless? Certainly not. The journey changes the person, the landscape changes, the understanding changes, the experience changes. But the horizon is not an object that can eventually be picked up and carried home. Enlightenment is sometimes imagined as a distant spiritual horizon. We think, one day I will finally arrive. The Heart Sutra invites us to question this entire structure. Perhaps the problem is not that we have failed to reach the destination. Perhaps the problem is the assumption that awakening is an object somewhere outside our present experience that the ego must eventually acquire. This does not mean that we should stop practicing. Quite the opposite. It means we practice without turning practice into grasping. There is an important distinction between aspiration and attachment. Aspiration says, may I develop wisdom, may I understand suffering, may I become less reactive, may I live with compassion, may this practice benefit others. Attachment says, I must become enlightened, I must have a profound experience, I must reach a special state, I must become spiritually superior. The first opens the heart. The second strengthens the very self-centeredness that practice is meant to loosen. Imagine learning to swim. If you enter the water terrified that you must immediately become an excellent swimmer, your body may become tense. You may fight the water. But when you learn to relax, breathe, and allow the body to cooperate with the water, swimming becomes more natural. You still practice. You still move your arms and legs. You still learn technique, but you stop fighting every moment. The spiritual path can be like this. We practice seriously without making every meditation session a test of our worth. We observe the mind without demanding that it become peaceful immediately. We notice anger without condemning ourselves for having anger. We notice attachment without creating another attachment to being free from attachment. This is especially important in meditation. Many practitioners become frustrated because they expect meditation to produce a particular experience. They want silence, bliss, spaciousness, visions, profound insight, or complete freedom from thought. When those experiences do not appear, they think meditation has failed. But the mind that says, I must attain a special meditative state, is itself something to observe. The desire for attainment becomes part of the practice. Instead of fighting it, we can ask, what does this desire feel like? What is it protecting? What does it assume about me? What happens when I do not believe it? This is where the teaching becomes deeply practical. The Heart Sutra is not asking us to adopt a strange philosophical belief that nothing exists. It is asking us to investigate our habit of turning experiences into fixed things. A thought arises, we say, my thought. An emotion arises, we say, my anger. A spiritual experience arises, we say, my awakening. A realization appears, we say, my wisdom. The Heart Sutra gently asks us to look again. Where is this my located? Is the thought permanent? Did we manufacture every condition that produced it? Is the emotion completely under our control? Can we command wisdom to appear at exactly the moment we want? Can we hold an experience permanently? When we investigate carefully, everything becomes more fluid. Wisdom arises through conditions. Thoughts arise through conditions. Feelings arise through conditions. Meditation experiences arise through conditions. Even our sense of being a separate person arises through countless conditions. This is what emptiness means in practice. Things are not empty because they are nothing. They are empty because they do not possess independent, permanent existence. A rainbow is a useful example. When sunlight, moisture, angle, and an observer come together under particular conditions, a rainbow appears. The rainbow is visible and beautiful. We would be wrong to say, there is absolutely no rainbow. But we would also be wrong to imagine that the rainbow exists as a permanent object that can be taken out of the sky and stored somewhere. Wisdom is similar. It is real as an experience and transformation, but empty as an independently existing possession. Awakening is real as liberation from ignorance and suffering, but empty of a separate owner who can claim it as property. This helps us understand the final phrase, no non-attainment. The Heart Sutra does not merely say there is no attainment, it also says there is no non-attainment. Why? Because even saying there is nothing to attain can become another philosophical position that we cling to. A person may hear the teaching and conclude, nothing needs to be done, there is nowhere to go, everything is already empty, so meditation is unnecessary. But that can become another form of ignorance. The Heart Sutra refuses to give the mind a final concept to hold. If you cling to attainment, let go. If you cling to non-attainment, let go. If you cling to wisdom, let go. If you cling to ignorance, let go. If you cling to emptiness, let go. This is the extraordinary precision of the teaching. Imagine standing in front of a mirror and seeing a beautiful landscape reflected in it. If you try to grab the landscape inside the mirror, you will fail. If you then become frustrated and declare, there is nothing in the mirror, you have also misunderstood. There is an appearance, but it cannot be grasped in the way you imagined. Our experience is similar. We constantly try to grasp things that are changing. We try to hold happiness. We try to hold identity. We try to hold relationships. We try to hold memories. We try to hold spiritual experiences. We even try to hold moments of insight. The Heart Sutra teaches us another way of relating to experience. See clearly, appreciate what appears, learn from it, act wisely, but do not turn it into something permanent that must belong to you. This is why nothing to attain is not a teaching of laziness. It is a teaching of freedom. When you believe that you must become someone else before you can be at peace, you create endless struggle. When you believe that awakening is a possession that you must acquire, practice can become another form of ambition. But when you understand that practice is the gradual release of confusion and grasping, every moment becomes part of the path. You can practice when you are washing dishes. You can practice when someone criticizes you. You can practice when you are disappointed. You can practice when you are praised. You can practice when fear arises. You can practice when joy arises. You can practice when meditation feels profound and when meditation feels completely ordinary. There is no need to wait for a special spiritual event. The person who is angry can observe anger. The person who is afraid can observe fear. The person who is attached can observe attachment. The person who wants enlightenment can observe the desire for enlightenment. Even the desire to become free can be examined with wisdom. This is where the Heart Sutra becomes extraordinarily intimate. It is no longer merely talking about philosophy. It is talking about the very movement of our mind. Whenever the mind says, I need to get somewhere, pause. Whenever the mind says, I must become someone, pause. Whenever the mind says, I need to possess this experience, pause. Whenever the mind says, I am finally spiritually advanced, pause. And whenever the mind says, there is nothing to do, so I do not need to practice, pause again. The middle way lies beyond both extremes. We practice, but we do not cling to practice. We seek wisdom, but we do not possess wisdom. We walk the path, but we do not create a permanent traveler. We aspire toward awakening, but we do not turn awakening into an object. We cultivate compassion, but we do not build an identity around being compassionate. We study emptiness, but we do not make emptiness into another belief. This is what the Heart Sutra means when it speaks of no wisdom and nothing to attain. At the deepest level, there is no separate self standing outside reality, reaching toward enlightenment as though enlightenment were an object on a distant shelf. The practitioner, the path, the practice, the wisdom, and the realization arise dependently. None exists independently. None can be permanently possessed. And yet, practice matters. Compassion matters. Ethical conduct matters. Meditation matters. Wisdom matters. The suffering we experience matters. The suffering of others matters. The Heart Sutra does not erase the world. It changes our relationship with the world. When we stop trying to possess everything, we can begin to meet life directly. When we stop demanding that every experience become permanent, we can experience it fully. When we stop building an identity around every thought and emotion, the mind becomes lighter. When we stop demanding that enlightenment become a possession, practice becomes less about becoming extraordinary and more about seeing clearly. Perhaps this is one of the deepest meanings of nothing to attain. It does not mean that nothing changes. It means that liberation is not the acquisition of another thing. It is the release of the grasping that continually tells us we are incomplete. A clenched fist cannot receive anything. Before it can receive, it must open. The opening of the hand may look like nothing has been gained, no object has been added, no possession has appeared. Yet something profound has happened. The grasping has ended. In the same way, awakening may involve less accumulation than we imagine, less identification, less resistance, less grasping, less fear, less insistence that life conform to our expectations, less belief in a permanent self that must defend, improve, protect, and complete itself. What remains is not nothingness. What remains is a way of seeing, a way of responding, a way of living. The Heart Sutra, therefore, does not ask us to abandon the path. It asks us to walk the path without turning the path into another possession. Study, but do not cling to knowledge. Meditate, but do not cling to meditation experiences. Seek wisdom, but do not construct an identity around being wise. Practice compassion, but do not make yourself the owner of compassion. Aspire toward awakening, but do not imagine awakening as something that an isolated self can possess. And when even these instructions have served their purpose, let them go as well. This is the freedom toward which the Heart Sutra points. There is wisdom, but wisdom is empty. There is practice, but practice is empty. There is awakening, but awakening is empty. There is a path, but the path is empty. And because all these things are empty, they are not imprisoned inside fixed identities. They remain open, dynamic, dependent, and capable of transformation. So when the Heart Sutra says, "There is no wisdom, no attainment, and no non-attainment," do not hear it as a rejection of Buddhism. Hear it as an invitation to release the final grasping. Do not turn wisdom into something you own. Do not turn enlightenment into something you chase. Do not turn emptiness into something you believe. Instead, continue looking, continue practicing, continue cultivating compassion, continue observing the mind, and gradually, perhaps, you may discover that the deepest freedom was never about becoming someone extraordinary. It was about seeing through the belief that you needed to become someone else in order to be free. That is the profound silence behind the words, "No wisdom, no attainment." The path continues, but the one who is desperately trying to arrive begins to disappear. And in that disappearance of grasping, the heart becomes free.